Hi, my name is Sabu Francis, and I am making a series of videos to teach architecture to practically anybody. But my main audience would be students who have just got into college of architecture, and also I want to convey some messages to teachers in architecture because I think a lot of teachers are pretty young and they need material to tell their students. And thirdly, my audience would be practicing architects who would want to refresh themselves on what architecture is all about. In this particular episode, I will be talking about the very fundamentals of what architecture is. Like, what is architecture? Basically, that's the question which you are going to ask. Now, to understand that, I would take a step back and ask some questions on some very abstract concepts. Like, I want to ask, what is the rarest of rare raw material which we have in this universe? And I have my own definition of what you mean by rarity. Then I'll be asking the question on what is tangibility? How do you hold on to things and physically hold on to things? I am holding this bottle of pickle in my hand. So that's tangible, but can we have a more finer understanding of that word tangibility? And third is to ask ourselves this question, what are the pulsations of life? That sounds a little strange actually. What I mean by that is that we live every instance by instance, and we go from one instance to the next one, and there is something very unique about each instance, and so these are the three questions, and let's delve into those. So okay, before I start, in case you are listening to this for the first time, I have a very peculiar way of explaining subjects, and so I really stress what is known as the stack in your mind. That means I will address a point not directly but quite indirectly many times, and so you need to pay attention and take notes if you want to, because I'll spin you around and then reach the point. So this is one such episode where the basic question is, what is architecture? But now I am seemingly discussing something else, but be patient with me and I'm sure it will be enjoyable. So the question is, what is the rarest of rare raw material which we have in the universe? Now, how do you define rarity? Now, rarity to me is like something which is irreplaceable, or replaceable because of a lot of effort. For example, gold. And gold is a pretty good example because gold ended up as the standard against which nations measure their wealth, or at least that's what they're supposed to do. That earlier to gold they were using cowrie shells, or even copper, or even some stones, or sometimes even leaves, but they found that these material are pretty plentiful, or reasonably plentiful, and therefore people could artificially create those, or not artificially, sometimes pick it up from the seashore, for example, these cowrie shells, and become technically more wealthy. So gold is something which is pretty difficult to mine. It's not available everywhere. It takes a lot of time to process, and therefore gold became a standard by which people measure their wealth. Nation measures their wealth. So gold is rare. So rarity is something which is very difficult to replace. Okay, so we'll say that is rare. Now, if you were to calmly think about this, I believe the rarest of rare raw material which we have is space. Now, space, why do I say that? Because space can really never be created other than in some very esoteric physics experiment. And at a very minute scale, there's a relationship between space and time and matter and all that, but that's all kind of not really accessible to mere mortals. space is truly rare because nobody can really make space. And if you invade space and put an object over there, again, let me take this bottle of pickle. I think this bottle of pickle is going to come into this lecture quite a lot because it happens to be near me. So this bottle of pickle, now when I move it, it happened to occupy this space which is there, but some of that space is now gone into the bottle itself. That's a little magical actually. But imagine this is not a bottle, it's something which is totally filled, and in that case that particular space has got occupied by that filled matter and nothing else can come there. Now if you take a building, there are lots of parts of that building which are frozen into space over there, and therefore it cannot be retrieved. You cannot use that space for anything else unless you demolish that building, and then it releases the space back, and therefore you can now start using it. So space is something which is very, very rare. Now we don't reflect on this, we kind of take it for granted. I have spaces in my house, I walk around in space, I go somewhere, there are a lot of beautiful places where we go and we enjoy those spaces. But think about it, if we were to look at space as something which is rare, then we will be little guarded about, hey, hang on, like if I go and invade that space and utilize that space with some built matter, there is a chance that something else cannot be done there, and whatever which is there. Sometimes it's there for years, sometimes it's there for centuries. And that's the kind of point of view which I would like youngsters to be thinking about. I need to encourage them to really start understanding that you are in a subject which can make or break this world actually. And there are many subjects which makes or breaks this world. In fact, in today's complex times, practically every subject will be making or breaking this world. But architecture is that much close to all of us. We always live inside some form of architecture. We can't escape it. You can't go to a restaurant and say, oh, finally I've got myself free from architecture and let me eat my food. No, even in a restaurant you would be noticing that you are inside some space, and architects do become quite a bore actually when they take their friends out for dinner, and half the time they are observing what's happening in the spaces there, and the rest of the crowd in that party is getting all annoyed. So architecture is really a very close subject. It deals with spaces and it deals with the responsibility of doing something nice in that space. So the second question is, what do you mean by tangibility? Like, what is tangible? Like, again, the pickle bottle comes. I can hold this bottle in front of me. I can hold it in my hand. My fingers can touch it. This particular bottle is practically empty now, and since it's made of glass, as it is common in most Indian households, we would reuse this particular bottle again for something or the other, and that is something which we need to really reflect on. That is space tangible? Can we hold space? Can we hold that space? Where is my camera here? Can I hold this space in front of me and say that, okay, let me treat this as something which is pretty tangible? Imagine pouring some magical liquid inside it and freezing it, like jelly, for example. Jelly is very magical when you're a child. It starts shaking around, and when your mom makes it, it's pretty nice. So I used to spend time looking at that piece of jelly just jiggling around. So think of space as something which is tangible, which needs a lot of nurturing, lot of understanding, lot of a feeling of that, okay, I own this. Now that is what, now that's what we need to really ask ourselves as architects. Can we look at space by itself as a tangible thing? Probably I'll be discussing this particular aspects later on much more in detail. But for now, since this is just an introduction, let me leave this question with you. Is space tangible? Do we hold on to it? Do we understand it? Do we look at it just like any other built matter? The third question which I want to ask is, what are the pulsations of life? Where does it happen? Now, what that means is that every instance passes by, and in each instance there's one unique property which the natural world understands, but we humans, we kind of take it for granted. A lot of times our mind is either worrying about the future, or we are worrying about our past. We are ruminating over something which happened earlier, and then we have not got rid of that particular thoughts or we are worrying about what may happen next. But what we are forgetting, that at every instance there is a synthesis, there is a stability of everything coming together. Like, these things are not broken apart, it's not suddenly scattered into its separate little components and we need to notice that. No, every instance brings everything together. So that's a synthesis point. And the glorious thing about architecture is a context. It is that caring hand inside which this synthesis happens. At every instance that synthesis is happening, and this needs to be really understood very deeply as an architect, that when we design buildings, when we design interiors, when we design whatever we design, in fact every design at the root is some form of architecture. And that's why the word architecture is used in multiple contexts. You even say architect of the nation, even that is a term which is used. So that's a caring hand, the context in which synthesis happens, when things come together for us to lead our lives. So why is this pulsating? Because it pulsates because every instance comes together and we appreciate what is there in front of us, and then we, in our mind at least, we tear it apart. We start looking at things separately because we can't digest the holistic together. So we need to take individual parts of that holistic and then put it all together. So these are the three questions. If you really reflect on these three questions, you will really start understanding what a glorious subject and what a noble subject architecture is. Those of you who are students who have just got into architecture, it's really a nice time for you to start thinking about along these three lines, these three questions, and thereby get into the subject of architecture. Teachers, I hope you would start looking at this material and start understanding this, and then give your own understanding to your students and fellow teachers. And professional architects who have got stuck in their day-to-day jobs, you take a time out and start thinking about these three lines, these 3 points. There are many more points which will come up. I'm not going to talk about architecture into its separate silos of subjects. I'm not going to have, most likely I won't do that. Probably once in a while I may do that. I love rambling about because I feel the audience is intelligent enough to stitch back all these points. I'm starting a website called archopus.com where all this material will be there. It will be an opus about all the stuff on architecture and design and life also, possibly once in a while. It's all intertwined. I'm a guy who's obsessed by the holistic nature of life, and therefore I probably will not go into small silo type of thinking. It should be interesting. All this material will be there. I will be having additional tools for students to put up their submissions, and where I and other colleagues of mine would be assessing students. So thank you so much. See you in the next episodes. Thank you.